Hello, today's Bible study comes from Acts chapter 7, verses 9 through 22, and reads as follows. Because the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt, but God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. He gave Joseph wisdom and enabled him to gain the goodwill of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So Pharaoh made him ruler over Egypt and all his palace. Then the famine struck all Egypt and Canaan, bringing great suffering, and our ancestors could not find food. When Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our forefathers to their first visit. On their second visit, Joseph told his brothers who he was, and the Pharaoh learned about Joseph's family. After this, Joseph sent for his father Jacob and his whole family, 75 in all. Then Jacob went down to Egypt, where he had and our ancestors died. He and his ancestors died. Their bodies were brought back to Shechem and placed in the tomb that Abraham had bought from the sons of Hamor at Shechem for a certain sum of money. As the time drew near for God to fulfill his promise to Abraham, the number of our people in Egypt had greatly increased, and a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. He dealt with treacherously he dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our ancestors by forcing them to throw out their newborn babies so that they would die. At that time, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for by his family. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and in action. Woo! So, we just gonna cut to the chase. God was with them. Stephen starts talking about God's presence being with Joseph. Um, and once again, he's telling him Joseph didn't have to go to the temple to get this. You don't have to go to a building to be close to God. And in this case, there was no temple, but Joseph was close to God. And what he's saying is God is with you all the time. And then it goes to becoming envious. They sold Joseph. Just to let you know, Joseph was rejected by Israel, the sons of Israel, just as Jesus was rejected by the sons of Israel. And Joseph ended up saving Israel. Jesus saved Israel and the whole world. And this is why Stephen, used Joseph in his speech. And this has to be the part where they say Stephen had wisdom, because he comparatively used Joseph and Jesus and was saying the same thing to them. And then 75 people. This was, if you look back in Genesis, it says there were 70 altogether of the family of Israel. And then when Stephen says it, it was 75. You know, Stephen was in the Old Testament. Stephen was sharp in his word. And it said 75. The reason they're different is because they just arrived in different ways. That's all. It wasn't a falsification. Um, the tomb of that Abraham bought, this was truly the only land that Abraham truly possessed in Canaan. And the rest was received only by faith. And as you see, when he comes down, and you're looking at what he's saying to him, excuse me for yawning. As you look at him coming down on it, their bodies were brought back to Shechem and placed in a tomb of Abraham. After this, Joseph sent his father Jacob and his whole family, 75 in all. Then Jacob went down to Egypt, where he and our ancestors died. So after they had died, all of their bodies were brought back to Shechem and placed with Abraham. As the time drew near for God to fulfill his promise to Abraham, the number of people in Egypt had greatly increased. So the things we know are that Moses was born. This was pleasing to the Lord. You know, it says at that time, oh, I'm sorry, I did skip the part about a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. He was a bad king with our people. He was bad. And he oppressed our ancestors by forcing them to kill their babies. Just kill their babies. And at this time, and Stephen is speaking, he speaks to the fact that Moses was born. And Moses wasn't just your regular child. So for 3 months, he was cared for by his family. His family was taking care of him. His biological, natural family was taking care of him. But then he was placed outside. Pharaoh's daughter took him in. Pharaoh's daughter. And Stephen is just talking Old Testament information that they have. And as he states, they brought him up as her own son. She lied and said he was hers. And then Moses became educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. And even though he was in the Pharaoh's house who was against God, God had plans for Moses. He was protected by the Lord. And once again, there was no temple needed to be protected by the Lord. Amen.